hacking left and right, and hideous groans broke out from the dying Thracians. Slashed by the sword, the ground ran red with blood. As a lion springs on flocks unguarded, shepherd gone, note this simile. Pouncing on goats or sheep, and claw mad for the kill, so Thetis' son went tearing into that Thracian camp until he'd butchered 12. Each man he'd stand above and chop with the sword. The cool tactician Odysseus grappled from behind, grabbing the fighter's heels, dragging him out of the way with one thought in mind. That team, with their flowing manes, must get through fast, not quake at heart and balk, trampling over the dead, those purebred horses still not used to corpses. So in other words, as Diomedes jacks these poor sleeping guys, Odysseus moves them out of the way so he can steal the horses and the chariot. But now, Diomedes came upon the king, the 13th man, and ripped away his life. So he kills 12 men that are soldiers and finally kills the king. His sweet life as he lay there breathing hard. A nightmare hovered over his head that night. Diomedes himself, sped by Athena's battle plan, while staunch Odysseus loosed the stamping horses, hitched them together tight with their own reins, and drove them through the ruck. Lashing them with his bow, he forgot to snatch the shining wet that lay in the well-wrought car. It's an amazing eye to certain kinds of details. Like I mentioned in Book 9, when Achilles gets up to greet Odysseus and the other two pals that come with him, he keeps the bow in his hand. It's quite it's an amazing eye here. Notice Odysseus has to use a bow to make the horses go, because the whip he forgot and he left it back there behind him, right? He whistled shrill, his signal to rugged Diomedes, pausing deep in thought. What was the worst, most brazen thing he could do? Seize the car where the handsome armor lay and pull it out by the pole, or prise it up, bodily haul it off, or tear the life from still more Thracian troops. His mind swarming. In other words, do I keep slaughtering or do I get out while I got the chance to get out? With all this, Pallas Athena swept to his side and cautioned Diomedes, back. Think only of getting back, great son of Thetis. Back to the ships, quick, or you'll run for your life. Some other god, who knows, may wait the Trojans. So Diomedes slaughters all of the Trojans, and Athena says, you got to get back. Apollo sees all of this. He wakes the Trojans, who we are told are in full panic mode at 604, 605, right? And they get back, they pick up Dolan's gear, right? And they make their way back. Immediately, when they get back, Nestor is very pleased, right? When he hears that Odysseus and Diomedes are back. Diomedes and Odysseus get hugs as they come in, hand clasps, everybody's giving them high fives. We're told that across the trench at line 653, across the trench, Odysseus drove the purebred team of horses with a rough, exultant laugh as comrades cheered, crowding in his wake. So in other words, they accomplished this major goal of going out, slaughtering these 13 men, Thracians, and stealing these beautiful horses. And we're told, once they reached Diomedes' sturdy lodge, they tethered the horses there with well-cut reins, hitching them by the trough where Diomedes' stallions pawed the ground, champing their sweet barley. Then away in their ship's stern, Odysseus stowed the bloody gear of Dolan in pledge of the gift they'd swore to give Athena. The men themselves waded into the sea, washed off the crusted sweat from shins and necks and thighs, and once the surface scoured the thick caked sweat from their limbs, and the two fighters cooled, their hearts revived, and into the polished tubs they climbed and bathed, rinsing off, their skin sleek with an olive oil rub, they sat down to their meal, and dipping up their cups from an overflowing bowl, they poured them forth honeyed, mellowed wine to the great goddess Athena. And that's how book number 10 ends. Well, let's jump quickly to 2a. Obviously, you can see here one of the major messages is the dangers of sleep, right? That is to say, not being on your guard, you can pay, right? Of course, here as well, a good liar is a good spy. And of course, that's Odysseus. Dolan not so good at it, huh, right? Okay. Notice as well that the reverence for the god Athena when you're successful. Don't forget that the Iliad was a religious text, right, for the Greeks. And so you always got to pay the proper respect. Right? In terms of symbolism, I want to mess around for a few seconds with this heron's cry. There's a note that the Fagles translation will provide that has to do with this idea of this lucky sign of the call of the heron, and it reads like this. It was lucky because the heron was on their right hand. Odysseus and Diomedes' right hand. This idea that signs on the right are lucky and on the left unlucky is common in many cultures and languages. In fact, our word sinister, for example, is the Latin word for laughed. So in other words, this is this first of possible symbols, the heron's cry. That is to say, Athena's telling them it's all going to go well, and she is in support. The irony of this book, of course, has to do with these ponies and these horses, right? Dolon wants, ironically, Achilles' horses. Odysseus actually gets the Thracian horses at the end. Of course, notice the other irony here. Deceit is not looked down on as something bad, right? It is accepted. Think about the fact that the Trojan horse will play a similar kind of game. In other words, fooling the opponent in some way. At 3a, well, comparison to other texts, I mentioned the Trojan horse, so let's mention Aeneid right away, the Aeneid right away. Again, one of the arguments that the Romans will make in the Aeneid through Virgil is that these Greeks, while great fighters sometimes, they fight dirty. And Romans don't like that kind of fighting at all. In other words, they like a more straight-up kind of fighting, slaughtering people in the night while they're asleep. Although, when we get to the Aeneid, we'll probably see some similar kinds of activity, right? I want to mention as well at 3a Machiavelli's Prince. When we get there, we will hear Machiavelli argue that the greatest princes, the greatest politicians, are the best liars. Not people who tell the truth, but people who are skilled in deceit. Okay? What other texts for you are you familiar with where warriors kill sleeping soldiers? What other texts for you teach, don't sleep, stay awake, because that's important? Obviously, we saw that early in this book. The sentries for the Greeks are awake, they're protecting the sleepers. The Thracians, not so much. At 3b, personal questions. Are you all right with killing sleeping soldiers? Right? Are you okay with this? I know for those of you that are Ambulatory Corpses fans, back to 3a, Walking Dead, right? I know that you're familiar with, there's a scene that's very controversial, and several of you mentioned it when we came to this book. Prior students have that. One group sneaks up on sleeping people and then kills them while they are asleep, and they are clearly troubled by that in some way. In the Iliad, it's not anything to be troubled by at all for the Greeks. What are your thoughts on it? Are you okay with lying to Dolon, for example, getting the information from him and then cutting his head off? What are your thoughts about that idea from Machiavelli's Prince that to be a good leader, you've got to be a good liar? Do you agree? How about this one? Is it true that all is fair in war and you ought to be able to do anything you want? Use, for example, any kind of weapons, any kind of chemical weapons or whatever? And what about the notion that there should be rules in war? For example, the Geneva Conventions come to mind, don't they? Of the ways in which soldiers and especially officers should be treated. What are your thoughts about that? Should war be left open so that if it's a weapon, you ought to be able to use it? We obviously think about the dropping of the 2 atomic weapons to end the theater of war in Japan in the Second World War. Is that the right thing or the wrong thing to do? What are your thoughts about that? Should there be rules when it comes to contests of war? Clearly, the Iliad seems to suggest at times there are rules, and at other times there are no rules, right? You can do whatever you want. All right, we now turn to Book 11. Achilles will watch now as the Greeks begin to get what he calls payback and slaughter. Our question will be, is this at all a proper attitude to have for a hero like Achilles? And of course, we're moving towards the inevitable death of Patroclus. Thank you. We'll continue.